Hello, young people, and welcome back to my loft. I am starting a new video series where I am going to be reading up here in the loft, but I'm going to be reading the backstory in Frankie and the Gift of Fantasy. If you haven't read the book yet, you don't know that there are actually two stories that are going on in the book side by side. The first story is Frankie's story, which is him disappearing through a crack in his bedroom ceiling and being whisked off to a two-moon planet on the other side of the galaxy. And of course, he has an adventure there. And that's the main plot in the book. But there's also a backstory, a subplot that happens back on Earth after he goes missing, because his parents, Evelyn and Roberto Rousseau, and his younger brother Alex, have no idea where he's gone. And not having any other evidence, they assume he's been abducted, and the police assume that he's been abducted. And after a while goes by, they kind of assume that he's been murdered. And long and short of it is that someone gets arrested for this crime that never happened, because we know Frankie is just fine where he is, and it goes through the criminal justice system. And I won't be a spoiler for what happens in case you haven't read the book, but I just wanted to say that you know, in this subplot, I really do address some of the issues and problems with our current criminal justice system, especially for those individuals who are innocent and don't have access to money. And so the defendant in this case was like that. So now I'm a forensic DNA specialist, so I've been in the field of criminal justice for more than 20 years. So this isn't coming out of nowhere for me. This is something I feel passionate about and have been involved with for a long time. I want to say a couple of other things before I get started. Frankie lives in Monterey, California. So the title of this chapter is What's Been Happening in Monterey. So it's chapter 4 of the book, so we're a little way into the book by the time I get started on this backstory. But if you want to start the book from the beginning, I have other YouTube videos that start with chapter 1. I also want to point out that I always wear earrings when I'm doing my talks and readings, and I also wear a hat. And the earrings are Scrabble earrings that I make myself, and they always have to do with the character that I am, who's my main character I'm reading about that day. So this time it's the I on this side, sorry, the I here, and then the M. And what that stands for is innocent man. So we're going to be talking about today, as we begin this video series, we're going to be leading into what happens to this innocent man. So that's why those earrings are there. So welcome to this reading of chapter 4. Chapter 4, What's Been Happening in Monterey. There is nothing more painful for a parent than losing a child. Imagine that you have a favorite pet, and if you do, this mental exercise will be easier. And one day, it simply disappears. If it's a dog, perhaps you left him in the yard. When you come home, he's no longer there. Or if it's a goldfish, you walk into the living room and find her fishbowl empty. In addition to the profound feeling of loss, you would also feel responsible because caring for the pet was your job and you failed to protect it. There's also the not knowing what happened, which can be even worse because over time, it can eat you alive inside. At first, Frankie's parents were annoyed when he didn't show up for dinner. "Where is he?" Evelyn asked, staring at his empty seat. "Has he arranged to eat dinner at a friend's house? Maybe he's goofing around and lost track of time." Then they got angry. "What the heck is he doing?" Roberto frowned. "What game is he playing? How can he do this to us?" But as time passed, their anger slowly turned to concern, and their concern turned to fear, and their fear turned into the worst feeling of all, terror. They called the parents of all his friends. They went through their fine house, checking under every bed, in every bathtub, in every closet. They went out to the yard and called his name. They peered fearfully into their swimming pool and walked up and down the block screaming, "Frankie, Frankie!" Finally, they called police. By 9 that evening, a police helicopter was in the air, scanning the neighborhood and nearby beaches with a bright light. By 11 o'clock, the television news crews had arrived. Evelyn clutched her cell phone, afraid to put it down in case Frankie called. Roberto spoke to the news crews and gave them a recent photo of Frankie for broadcast. Alex was so terrified that he refused to leave his mother's side. As the hours passed, the house filled with police officers and crime scene investigators who questioned everyone and took Frankie's toothbrush for DNA. "If his body is ever found," a cop named Joshua Morgan explained unfeelingly, "the DNA on his toothbrush will allow us to identify him. DNA is very helpful in such instances." Evelyn's heart dropped, and Roberto's hair stood on end. If his body is ever found, did the cops think that Frankie was dead? The police went through the Rousseau's fine house from top to bottom and gathered photos off Evelyn's computer. Frankie playing soccer. Frankie at a friend's birthday party eating pizza. Frankie grinning with friends at summer camp. Frankie fiddling with a pencil. They interviewed his parents repeatedly. "When did you last see him? What was he wearing? Was he upset about anything? Who are his friends and where do they live? Has he ever disappeared like this before?" To each question, his family gave their best answers. "I was the one who saw him last," Evelyn said, choking back tears. "I sent him to the bedroom for dawdling over his homework. He was wearing a pair of black shorts and a red t-shirt. He had socks on, I think, but no shoes." "He's a daydreamer," Roberto added. "He often misses deadlines, but he never misses meals. Here's a list of the kids he sometimes hangs out with in the neighborhood. And no, he has never disappeared like this before." Most missing children, the police assured them, were found within 24 hours of their disappearance. So as family and friends began arriving in Monterey the next morning, eager to help, they all offered comforting words. "Don't worry, he'll show up soon. They're bound to find him. The police are trained for this kind of thing. They know what they're doing." Frankie's grandmother even said, "Goodness, we'll all be laughing about this by the same time tomorrow," which was received very coldly, but excused because she was elderly and not quite there, if you know what I mean. Alex was especially hard hit. He was a gregarious but sensitive child, and the sudden loss of his brother left him heartsick. But he wasn't the kind of person to remain paralyzed for very long. He had the gift of getting things done, and doers desperately need to be busy. So his mind raced this way and that, trying to think of a way he could help. "We need to put up flyers," he shouted suddenly. "That's what they do on TV when a kid is missing." Alex fled to his bedroom to make one. His flyer wasn't perfect, and Evelyn, who had the gift of perfectionism, found a couple of spelling errors and corrected them. Otherwise, the flyer looked great. Evelyn made hundreds of copies, and a few hours later, dozens of people were scattering to different areas of Monterey and nearby towns with masking tape and pushpins in hand. "Missing boy" was emblazoned across the top of the flyer, followed by Alex's description of his brother and a photograph of Frankie in his soccer uniform. There was also the promise of a $50,000 reward. Frankie's father phoned his investment advisor and instructed him to sell off some of their stock. He was sure that by the time someone called with a lead, which he desperately prayed they would soon, he'd be able to pony up the cash. He had to. The fact that Evelyn had taken literally thousands of photographs of her ne'er-do-well son was a definite plus. She saturated the media with photographs of Frankie that morning, and Channel 12 broadcast a very impressive photo of him headbutting a soccer ball. His disappearance was the leading story by noon. The head of the Missing Children's Task Force, an organization that assisted families in the early stages of a possible abduction case, stopped by mid-afternoon. Two well-meaning, business-like women came to the house to advise Frankie's parents about setting up a volunteer center to coordinate a search independent of a police investigation. One of them turned a pair of pitying eyes on Evelyn and said, "You know, dear, the police are screw-ups. Why, our David has been missing for more than 2 years, and they haven't turned up a single lead." This wasn't what Evelyn was hoping to hear, of course, but at least the women were going to help them find Frankie, and for that she was grateful. There were also calls from 2 psychics. The first provided a vague description of Frankie's location as near a lake or large body of water with some kind of greenery and perhaps a culvert. She whipped off an email that detailed her retainer agreement. $10,000 non-refundable. $10,000, Evelyn groaned. She's a thief. The second psychic offered up her services free to grieving souls, and then delivered the crushing blow. "He's dead, poor thing, but I guess you already suspected that." Frankie's parents were exhausted but unable to sleep. A friend led Evelyn to a back bedroom and made her lie down, "Even if it's just for a few minutes, honey." But it was no use. Even as Evelyn's eyes closed, her heart hammered, her stomach cramped, and her mind raced from one scenario to another, searching desperately for hope in any corner where it might be hiding. "Please, please, please," she gasped, squeezing her eyes shut and rolling into a fetal position, a pillow between her knees. "Let him show up." Alex brought her a cup of tea, but she couldn't drink it. As more hours passed with no news, the volunteers returned to their homes for dinner, and the fine house by the sea became quiet. Frankie's parents crawled into bed beside one another, Alex between them, lost in an agony that only they could truly understand. Evelyn looked at the clock on the nightstand. It was 8:55 p.m. "Oh, no," she whispered to Roberto with overwhelming dread. "It's been more than 24 hours. There was a shuffle from the doorway as Frankie's grandmother made her way back to bed after a trip to the bathroom. "You know," she said, with a little chuckle, popping her head into the bedroom, "we'll all be laughing about this same time next week." Then she hobbled on down the hallway, thinking she'd said something helpful and uplifting, when in fact her words hung like doom in the air. Shh.